sit up front now, just like school.
Thank you, Steve, for seeing what you do. God, you guys settled out quick. Well done. Welcome back to Wednesday Morning Roundtable. We are actually in our third year, do you believe it? Time flies. We are experiencing a little bit of technical difficulty. We think it's in the wires, and probably in the wires that we can't reach after some electrical work that's done. So if there is anybody who thinks they have a magic solution, please come forward now. And if there's any doctors in the audience, never mind. Anyway. Yeah, so we're going to muddle through the best we can. We have two great speakers, and I'm sure that it will be compelling with or without clear visuals. I just want to, again, not only welcome you, but say that we have several new members with us today. And I won't ask you to stand because you just got seated, but if you could just wave, stick your arms up in the air so people can see where you are. Excellent, and welcome to you. So this morning's presentation on mental health, gun control, and the SAFE Act will be presented to you by Dave Gould and Ray Bizzari. And I have a little bit of a biography for those of you who don't know their background, which is hard to believe with their rich history of service to this community, but I will read it to you anyway. Dave graduated from Union Springs High School, attended college and left college for the U.S. Army in 1967. He was honorably discharged in '69 and joined the New York State Troopers in 1970. He spent 35 years in the Troopers, retiring as senior investigator in charge of the Auburn and Waterloo Stations Bureau of Criminal Investigations. Dave then became a special investigator with the Seneca County District's Attorney Office for 2 years and then was elected as the Cayuga County Sheriff in 2006. He holds the office today. Dave is also, on a personal note, married to Suzanne and has a 19-year-old stepdaughter that is a sophomore at Ithaca College nearby. He is on 30 county boards and committees and enjoys all of them. Now that is one for the Guinness Book of World Records, I think. I'm going to phone them up later today. Ray is formerly the Executive Director of Cayuga Counseling Services and is the Director of Community Services for Cayuga County. In his capacity at DCS, he oversees the mental hygiene system in Cayuga County, which includes services, oversight, and planning for individuals with substance abuse, mental health, and developmental disabilities. Ray has a bachelor's degree in creative writing and social studies and a master's degree in public administration from Marist College. So welcome Ray and Dave, and we're going to give the floor over to Ray first.
Technical difficulties. I have copies of the PowerPoint if you guys want to, share them. I'm not going to put that up for you to look at. It makes me busy. So it's interesting though because I think sort of what's missing from the SAFE Act and this discussion in general about violence in our communities is a conversation. So now we get to have a conversation because we don't have any props. So it's sort of, I guess, metaphorical in a way. The New York SAFE Act, Dave's going to talk about the implications for law enforcement, but there's also implications for mental health providers. So I don't know, this law was passed pretty quickly in the middle of the night. It was passed with quite a few votes in both the House, or in the Senate and in the Assembly in New York State, and it does a couple of things. I think what Governor Cuomo said when he signed it was, it limits gun violence through common sense, reasonable reforms that include addressing the risks posed by mentally ill people who have access to guns. He never really asked us. We have a state coalition of Director of Community Services, like the state coalitions of sheriffs and other law enforcement folks, and nobody was really consulted in that. And I think that didn't help. The overview, so the Act, how it relates to the work that we do, it's changed a couple of parts of mental hygiene law. So, I'm going to hit you with some stuff, it's a lot of information. I apologize in advance. If I use acronyms, stop me, ask me what they stand for. I do this a lot, so it sort of rolls. There's a duty to report in this law, all right? So like in outpatient settings, hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, you have a variety of staff that work there. So if you're a physician, and this is where the law is a little shaky in a lot of ways, because if you accept the premise that people who are mentally ill are dangerous, and research doesn't necessarily support that, but if you do accept that premise and you want to create a law that makes reporting mandatory, and so you can identify these folks who might or might not harm themselves or someone else, you sort of build a law that has holes in it. So like in clinics you have psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, psychologists. The law compels certain social workers, LCSWs. You start out as an LMSW, you work your way up through supervision, you get enough supervision, you see enough folks, you get a C, you're an LCSW, you keep going, you get an R, you're an LCSWR. LCSWs, LCSWRs, physicians, nurses, and psychologists, licensed and unlicensed, have to make reports on people that they believe are likely to harm themselves or others, which I gotta tell you, on any given day, in the county clinic, people come in, lots of them. We got about 1,200 patients there. A lot of folks come in talking about wanting to harm themselves or someone else. That's pretty standard in working with people who are struggling. And therapists, doctors do a really good job of sort of talking people down from that sort of stuff, making safety plans, really sort of separate out what risk is and all that sort of stuff. You're an LMSW, an LMHC, these are different spaghettis that come after people's names who practice. They don't have to report. So the folks that they see who may meet that criteria, which is a little shaky to begin with, two parts of the law. One says likely to harm, which is this part. Then there's the part that we pick up people for hospitalizations, imminent risk. They're two different sort of standards. So not everybody's being reported. Nobody told anybody that they had a report. The law compels me to do certain things. It doesn't compel me to educate people about their responsibilities as far as reporting in this law. Their trade organizations have done that. There's also been some changes to Kendra's law. You guys familiar with that assisted outpatient treatment? And there's been some changes to discharges from Central New York psychiatric centers, which are hospitals where folks who have, in the prison system, where they have mental illness, that's where they end up. So these are the slides I'm sort of walking you through a little bit. That duty to report, there's this portal that, if you go to the New York State Office of Mental Health website, there's this portal where you can click on and you make your report. It's sent, it's got all the clinical information, it comes to me. There's one of me in every county in New York State. We have to verify that the people are real, that their license is real. We have to evaluate the clinical summary on the report. And then if we agree, we're supposed to send it on to Division of Criminal Justice Services, which is the state agency that sort of does the licensing for firearms. Does a bunch of other stuff. That's one of the things that they do. We'll get back to that later. Changes in AOT, so assisted outpatient treatment, Kendra's law. People I get a lot of calls from families. It's really heartbreaking. You know what I mean? It really is. They have adult children who are psychotic episodes. However that happens, whether it's substance-induced, which is a real thing. And also, it just happens anyways for some people. People have civil rights, you know what I mean? They're out there in the community, they're homeless, they're on the streets, they're doing what they do. Parents they're heartbroken about this. Can you help? Can you help? Can you help? And we have, I think everybody thinks the mental health system has these enormous powers, but it really doesn't. We have very limited powers in what we can do, and then people do have civil rights, and you have to sort of, find that sort of tightrope line to kind of walk there. So Kendra's law is the thing that parents are like, can you do this? Can you get a court order to compel this individual into treatment? And we do this sometimes. It's very expensive. The research doesn't support, the research that I looked at doesn't support the AOT is what works, the court order, because we have people on AOT that don't respect the court order. The court order really, if we're able to get one and people don't do what they're supposed to do in terms of being in treatment, we issue a pickup order, they go to the hospital. And then they get released from the hospital, and then they're back on the order again. So that's not really what's compelling. What's compelling is the services that you convince people to accept to stay well. So we're not able to convince people anything for a number of reasons. I'll talk about that a little later on too. So I'm happy to try and get through this stuff, because like Dave says, there's a ton of stuff. AOT is very expensive, time-consuming, cumbersome. You would hate it if I slapped a court order on you and told you you had to do certain things. You would hate my guts, and you would hate the therapist that treated you, and the minute that court order was done, you'd be out the door. We can't capture people by convincing them that this is important, by deploying certain resources to get them to buy into this, then we're in trouble. It extended the orders. The initial orders were 6 months, now it's a year. We got to go to court to get them to get treatment plans reapproved by judges. So did the SAFE Act make us safer? Not everybody's being reported. Here's some interesting numbers for you. Started March 18th is when the law went into effect, so the reports started getting made. The Veterans Affairs exempted themselves from complying with the law. Psych hospitals in New York State didn't comply with the law for several months. They held on to all of their reports and then just slammed us with them. It's 40, 50, 60 a day. So from March 18th to June 25th, which is unfortunately the most recent information we have, there's 8,500 reports were sent to DCSs in statewide, 8,500 reports. 8,278 we approved, sent on to DCJS for some sort of action. They determine whether people have pistol permits pending or active. I can't even read this stuff. At the end of the day, less than 1% resulted in somebody having something happen to their pistol permit pending or not. Less than 1% of the 8,500 people. So I'm sort of wondering where the other 7,000 went. What it does, though, it doesn't talk about long guns, crossbows, grenades, howitzers, tanks, none of that sort of stuff. It's a handgun. I mean, right, you can laugh about that because it's true, but if they don't have a handgun, but they have other weapons, nobody knows. So when they go to the house, they don't look for other weapons. What we do now, you got great people working in this town. I said that before, like Dave, his staff, APD, troopers, hospital. We meet regularly about stuff, trying to figure out how to make people safer, how to take care of people who are presenting risk. When we do so we got a 941, 945s. 941s are when cops are out driving around and they run across somebody who's a danger to themselves or else. They can transport them to the hospital for an evaluation. In the Article 28 hospital, Auburn Memorial Hospital is in Article 28. There's an inpatient unit there. 945 are pickup orders that DCSs or their designees sign, which direct the police to go pick someone up, take them to the hospital for an evaluation. When we're really concerned about somebody who has guns, we have this duty to report, So these guys come, get the pickup order, go get the individual. They go to the house, they talk to the people who live there. The guns are secured. This has been happening sort of regularly right along. Like everybody's taking this sort of stuff very, very seriously. So, the law added this sort of other layer of junk to the work that we do that really makes people feel good. Like if you like the idea, again, if you're finding out who's at risk, we're making reports on 11-year-old kids because in 5 years they could be 16, they can join the service, get honorably discharged, and get a weapon. So we got to report 11-year-old kids who say, and I'm going to take some time off. Not related to guns, it's related to likelihood to harm themselves or others by any means. So, you should know that. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, so that's that. Do questions come now, later? The rules?
Later.
Okay. Just wondered if you had any, because it's a lot to give you. So, So the likelihood of people who have mental illness committing violent acts is really complicated by substance abuse issues, frankly. Substance abuse, people who are using, they're the dangerous ones because they're losing their ability to sort of self-regulate. People discharged from a psychiatric hospital for severe mental illness that don't have any substance abuse issues are just as likely to commit a violent act than a random individual out on the street that doesn't have substance abuse issues and doesn't have mental health issues. So this notion that people who are ill are dangerous isn't necessarily accurate. They're more likely, frankly, to be victimized. If you look at the numbers, if I could read them, I printed it, it's too small, I didn't memorize them, I'm sorry. But they're more likely to be assaulted, raped, injured, hurt, because they're very vulnerable. You drive around, you see folks, you see them. They're in the streets, they're holding up signs, they're talking to themselves, they're doing those kind of things. We avoid them, because we don't know how to talk to them. which makes it worse because we isolate them even further. When they're isolated, they don't seek treatment. This is the thing, when people are in treatment, we do a really nice job of monitoring them. So the research doesn't really support that business that the governor's talking about. I think that people are likely to harm themselves more than they are to harm other people. I mean, people hear voices every day. We get a lot of this sort of stuff happening. Like I said, I've got 1,200 patients, probably a couple hundred, 250 fit this sort of category of people that we're really concerned about. You know, we try to sort of make sure that we manage their treatment. Sort of been hurt recently, I mean, you know, in terms of not having the resources. I mean, you hear this all the time. We're pretty used to doing more with less. But there's certain things that we need to do this particular work. If this is the work that you want us to do, which is to go out and get people who are struggling and who are entertaining ideas harming themselves or others, we don't have the capacity to sort of do that right now because the things that you do to sort of do that aren't available to communities like ours because we're small, rural, not very wealthy, that sort of stuff. So, for instance, borderline personality disorders and bipolar disorders. Bipolar disorders are the folks who have these tremendous swings. They're very risky, you know what I mean, because they're way up and then they're way down, and they're very risky, and they don't regulate well, and they don't take their meds necessarily. People have a hard time remembering to take their meds. Some folks are on multiple meds. We do a lot of med boxes, but the thing that we do that's really helpful is injections, long-acting antipsychotic drugs, which stabilize people for long periods of time. You know, like it's a shot for a month or twice a month. Very expensive, between $1,000. $4,500. Insurance companies won't pay for it. People who don't have insurance, they can't pay for it either. So they get pill boxes with pills that they take or don't take. So they're all over the place. You know, you go to the hospital, you get out, you're a little stable, you're not. We got some problems with the system. So I think that if the governor really was serious about wanting to do something about this sort of stuff, he could have resourced everybody to do the work. You know, the cops don't have the resources. We're talking about these folks that law enforcement respond to a lot in the community that are not stable. They're threatening people, they're doing stuff like that. So, you know, they're taking 2 cars off the road to sit with somebody in the emergency room who sits for 4, 5, 6 hours and gets some sort of evaluation and goes home. It's not really efficient use of our resources. So we talk about different ways to sort of manage that. We're trying to do some really cool things at County Mental Health. We have a lot of great agencies that we partner with. We do a real lot of local planning around how to integrate the services for people. We've got great partners. We talk about, you know, ACT teams, which are assertive community treatment teams. These are the teams that go out and find people and convince them to come into treatment, treat them in their home. We're not allowed to do that. We can't bill for off-site services. I send somebody to somebody's house. That's the legislature paying for that, frankly, or us trying to earn enough money to, you know, offset that cost. Our system's been debilitated. I mean, the sheriff's position, when he talks about this, you'll see that the sheriffs in New York State support reinvestment in the mental health system because we don't have the stuff that we need to do the job. I mean, I'm not trying to paint a bleak picture here. I'm just trying to give you the truth. We do some really cool work, and there's a lot of people that are doing really, really well, but there's some people that we're really concerned about. Not so much that they're going to hurt somebody, but they're going to hurt themselves, or they're just living such a destitute life in such isolation, poverty, and illness, physical and mental, because the drugs that people take just knock the hell out of their systems. These folks die a lot earlier than you and I do because of the psychotropic meds that they take. But we find a way to sort of make that work. So we talk about things like mental health first aid training for law enforcement and for folks like you, so that like when you walk by somebody on the street who's got Down syndrome, you stop and say hi. But when you walk down the street by somebody, you don't actually walk down the street by somebody who's talking to themselves. You pretty much cross the street, walk down the other side, because you don't know what to say. That's not your fault, but I would like to teach you, you know, how to talk to folks, how to be part of that solution, to self-regulate our people that live in our community, our neighbors, our friends. Because we're all sort of like one head knock away, you know what I mean, from being in that sort of situation. I mean that. It can be, you got a lot of traumatic brain injury in the clinic, you know what I mean, that mimics these sort of symptoms. These are people who got in car accidents, who had a fall, that sort of stuff. I mean, these are your neighbors. You know, we have to do a better job of taking care of each other. And they did a really nice job with this PowerPoint. I'm sort of winging it off the top of my head. So, you know, that's it. I mean, I can go on. I think that what I'd like you to be left with is that, you know, we're not on the street crying about not having enough money to do the work. We're sort of trying to figure out how to do this the best way we can. But you need to know, I think, that the risk is greater for people to hurt themselves than it is for them to hurt others. It's a very small population of people to do that. So going to take guns away from people, I'm not sure that we should go to bed thinking, yay. You know what I mean? Because if somebody wants to hurt themselves or someone else, guns are really good for that impulsiveness. You want to plan something out and you want to hurt yourself? Come on. There's just a ton of ways to do that. So I think we're missing the boat here. I think it's another opportunity where we could have had a discussion on the kind of stuff that needs to happen in the world, rather than passing stupid laws, frankly, that don't do anything other than, it's like you know, like it makes you think that something good happened. But in the end of the day, there's more. It's not doing what it said it was going to do, and even if it did what it said it wasn't going to do, what it was going to do, still wouldn't be any step closer to making sure that people were okay in our community. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Ray. So we're going to just release the whole technology issue, and Dave is just going to speak about primarily the mental health aspect of his presentation, because I saw his presentation, it's like that thick. So Dave and I spoke, and we are going to try to make that available to you, but he's just going to talk about the mental health aspect of it. So
Thanks, Lou.
thank you,
Thanks
Dave.
so much. Yeah, if I'd have known we weren't going to have our technology working very well today, I would have made copies for everybody, but I didn't. But without that, it's going to be hard for me to go through this. It's a 3-hour presentation that I put together.
And you got 5 minutes, go.
Months ago. And I tried to wheedle it down to like 20 minutes, half hour today, but it's not going to work without that. So what I'm going to do is continue to talk about mental health that Ray did. And Ray, I just wanted to comment you look much better without your ponytail. I think everybody and anybody that doesn't know it, he gave it up for St. Paul's for children with cancer. So he looks great. And Ray kind of concluded with this law is stupid. I'm not going to echo that. I'm going to probably say some worse things about this law as we go on, because it was not done correctly. Absolutely no doubt in my mind about it, and I'm not trying to upset anybody here. Do we need gun changes? Yeah, we do. We absolutely do. But we don't need them done the way it was done with this law. And let me give you some examples. The law was passed on January 15, 2013, 2 days after it was introduced and signed into law that the governor signed it that same day. 2 days. These legislators had 2 days to look this law over. And you know how many pages this law is? It's a lot more than this, naturally. It's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pages long. And they didn't look it over. I guarantee you they did not look it over. Let me continue this. A message of necessity was issued by the governor, which waived the normal 3-day waiting period between when a bill is presented to the legislature and when they can permissively act on it. Normally, a law in this state takes anywhere between a year and a year and a half, from start to finish, from forming it to approving it. This took 3 days. So that should tell you something. And Ray said they didn't reach out to any mental health professionals in the state. They did not reach out to any sheriffs. Anybody in law enforcement in this state and ask them about this law. No one. And there's a lot of people in this state that have a lot of law enforcement background and knowledge, including our attorneys at the State Sheriff's Association. They never asked us anything. The law itself was modeled after the gun control reforms advocated by the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence and mayors against illegal guns. This includes the private sales, restrictions of assault weapons, and the ammunition capacity restrictions found in the SAFE Act, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. The law was passed by a wide majority in both houses of the legislature. It was passed by a vote of 43 to 18, with one abstention, in the Senate, and that to me is amazing. and a vote of 104 to 43 in the Assembly, and that's even more amazing. In the intervening months since the SAFE Act's passage, 52 of New York State's 58 counties, that's not counting, that's counting one county in the city, have adopted resolutions formally opposing the SAFE Act. That's got to speak for something. 54 out of 58 counties say that this act is not proper. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association is currently challenging the constitutionality of the law in the United States District Court for the Western District of New York, out of Buffalo. The New York State Sheriff's Association has joined the case to lend their formal support to the challenge of the law. This case is currently in motions and will likely have a preliminary court date sometime in the future. The lone ammo restriction violation case that has been publicized thus far, one, was dismissed by the DA in a downstate county. It's the only arrest that's happened under this law, one, and that was dismissed. The New York State Sheriff's Association has taken a public stance opposing some, but not all, of the provisions of the SAFE Act. We're awaiting the outcome of the ongoing legal challenge. That's just some, and I've got pages of facts on this. It's amazing how this law was passed, they say at nighttime, and literally it was. It needs to be done. We all know that gun reform needs to be done in this country. We know that. Look at 2 days ago. But it needs to be done with input like any other law that this state passes. It needs to be done by professionals being reached out to, giving their professional opinions. And then, you know, these people in Albany, these so-called attorneys in Albany, putting it together, reaching out again before they finalize it and asking input of not only professionals but citizens. There's nobody in here that was asked, I'm sure, about this law. No one was. So for our legislative people to vote on this and pass it without knowing what's in it, to me, is not right. And thank God our local people voted no on this. And that includes Mike Mazzolio and Gary Finch. Both voted no for this, and I can commend them up and down, because whether they looked at it or not, I didn't ask them, and I'm not going to. Who knows, they'll say yes, but I would hope they did. I would hope some of them did, that it was an impossibility to do it in that kind of time. I just want, again, I'm going to present, hopefully the committee will let me present the whole SAFE Act at a different time when we could show you and you could see that I go through by point on point, because this is a 3-hour presentation that I'm hopefully going to do in maybe an hour someday. But I want to continue what Ray said, because that's the only time we have left. The first initial case in New York State happened in this county where mental health asked DCJS to reach out to the law enforcement, which was us, and asked to have one of their gun permits taken. The way this thing started, and Ray and I laugh at it today, they did not get the information. They were not required. It's not mental health's fault. No one was required to get the information other than a name. A name. Not an address, not a date of birth, not a social security number. So naturally, when that information was sent in, that's all they could legally get. So it wasn't their fault. That's all that the law says they could get. When they sent that name in after this person, and I'm certainly not going to mention it, had a little problem and they fell under this law, they sent the name to DCJS. And DCJS, there was only 3. It was kind of an uncommon name, but imagine if it was Tom Jones. It would have gone out to, and they didn't have an address, and went out to every law enforcement agency that had that same name, that had a pistol permit. It's mind-boggling anyhow. That's how it was done. We had 3 names come across the state with that name. One, we had to go grab this person, and I knew him. And I know this person. You know, you shouldn't say nobody has a mental health problem. You don't know that for sure, but I was pretty sure this person did not have a mental health problem. So we had to go get him, take his gun, even though he denied ever seeing a mental health specialist, take his gun over, certainly wasn't any kind of fighting or anything, but over his, certainly he disagreed with it adamantly. And that gun was taken and turned in, and come to find out it certainly was not him. It was somebody else in another county. But that person can certainly sue the state, still may. We had a hearing in front of Judge Leon, and come to find out, we owed that person an apology. We being anybody that had anything to do with this case, because of the way the law ran. There's so many modifications that are going on as we speak, amendments with this law, that again, should not have happened if they'd have thought it out to begin with. There's so many of them. One is, and I'll do a police part of this. One is they never took into effect a thought about a police officer having more than 7 rounds in their gun. We were not exempt from that originally. You know, everybody, you all heard that you can only have 7 rounds in your guns now. We weren't exempt from it. We had to, until that was modified, and it was, we had to take our rounds out of our guns and only have 7 in there. And yet a bad guy can have rounds of hundreds and have clips of hundreds, and we could only carry 7 rounds. That's the kind of law that was passed without being thought about. And to me, that's mind-boggling. That's just 2 examples. There's so many amendments going on. And eventually this law will be right, and will be done right, but it could have been done right if it wasn't rushed through. Everybody, I think, in here knows it was after Connecticut. I think the theory and the reasoning was certainly we got to do this quickly and get illegal guns off the street. And that's not what happened. And that's not what's going to happen unless this is modified a lot. We got to remember, legal people, when I say legal, people that are doing things right with pistol permits, that are following the law, that are applying and then getting their pistol permit through checks and balances, are the ones that are being penalized with this law. The bad guys don't care about 7 rounds. They don't care about 100 rounds. They don't care about carrying illegal weapons, which is this law is about. This penalizes, the way it is in this form, penalizes people that are honest and following the rules. To me, it's just amazing. Let me give you an example of how we handle pistol permits, not only in our county, in the state. When someone wants a pistol permit, they come to the sheriff's office. I have a sergeant assigned just to pistol permits. They get the application, they get the forms, they have to have references, background checks, mental background checks, and everything. It takes literally months. Anybody that in here's got one. Years ago, it took weeks. Now it takes months. And yeah, we do the background on them. I review it. It comes to my desk. I review it. I go through the whole thing, and I either approve or disapprove it. Then it goes to Judge Leon in this county. He's the pistol permit county judge. It goes to him for his final approval. Out of 7 years that I've been here, I've done literally thousands. Tom and I have agreed on every one at the end. You know, initially, some I approve, some he doesn't, and vice versa, but he calls me, I call him. We always give each other our reasons, and we always come to an agreement that that should not be issued or it should be issued. So that's how the process works. It is all done through the sheriff's department, through backgrounds. And anybody that's had one done knows it's very extensive, including, this is the only time we do a mental health check on anything in this county is for a pistol permit, and Ray certainly knows that. But that's how it's done. And so these people have followed the rules and the laws of New York State. They are legally able and to obtain and possess weapons. When I say weapons, these are all pistols. That's why it's called pistol. It's not long rifles, as Ray said. We have no idea how many millions of long rifles are out there because you don't have to register. So if somebody wants to go, you know, and has a mental health problem and goes out shooting people, and they, you know, threaten themselves, somebody else to raise people, it's sent to DCJS. If they don't have a pistol permit, we don't do anything about it because we don't know if they have a weapon. So this is just, that's what I mean. This law has got to be modified to somehow include long rifles. I mean, we're never going to probably register long rifles. There's millions upon millions of them out there. And our Second Amendment says we have the right to have them. And I agree 100% with our Second Amendment. That's why I don't agree with some of this. I think some of you saw my article in the paper last Friday. It was certainly, you know, I can't believe it made the press throughout the state. Albany has called me. I'm sure the governor's probably heard about it. But I am in total disagreement of releasing anything to foil that people have pistol permits, legal, processed, and obtained pistol permits. You talk about something that is ridiculous, and I'm going to have people in here that disagree with me. But if you've got a pistol permit in here, and I'm not going to ask who does, because that's like putting it in the paper. If you've got a pistol permit, that means you got it legally, and you obtained it through a lot of pain, because it's not easy to get, and it costs. And we know the state makes money, we know the federal government makes money on every pistol permit. That's why they're expensive. We don't make anything, the county. Anyhow, if you have a pistol permit, and I release this information to foil, And this person, they did it downstate, I think you all have seen this. They did it down in Westchester County, released hundreds of thousands of names of people and their addresses who had pistol permits legally obtained. And believe me, there were burglaries at these houses, and the bad people were stealing these guns left and right. And it's not going to happen here unless I get some order from some court and somebody comes and tells me that you have to do that or you're going to be arrested, whatever it may be. I am not going to release that information. Can you imagine a bad guy who looks for burglaries, who looks for guns to sell, to take out of state to sell, to use in armed robberies, to use in home invasions, knowing where you live and knowing what guns you have? And you leave to go to work and your teenage son or daughter's there getting ready to go to school and somebody breaks into that house, or your elderly parents or your grandparents are in that house, somebody breaks in because they know you have a gun and they hurt that person. You think how I would feel giving that person that information. That's the way I feel. And I hope everybody agrees with that. I'm sure they won't, but somebody's going to have to convince me why that I should have to legally release that information. It's just mind-boggling to me. This law says I have to. This law says I have to. I mean, there's opt-out forms, and I think you've all heard of those. The opt-out form, when people fill out an opt-out form, I don't have to do that. But there's people out there that truly do not know that there is opt-out forms. There's elderly people out there, there's people who do not watch TV and read the newspaper that have legal pistol permits and pistols. And they don't know about an opt-out form and they haven't taken advantage of that. Does that mean that I'm supposed to release that information to somebody because they didn't fill out an opt-out form? Not going to happen with me. As long as I'm sheriff. If people choose not to have me sheriff next time, that's up to you. But this is the way I feel about this law. It is absolutely the worst part of the law. And there's other parts that I could certainly go into, and I will if I'm invited back. But that may not be. But I just, if somebody in here disagrees with me, I'd really like to see, maybe you don't want to talk now, but you can certainly talk to me afterwards. Give me a reason why, and I'll understand that reason, maybe. I won't agree with it, but maybe I'll understand it. Unless somebody wants to ask now or give their opinion now. Is anybody like to give their opinion that they feel the same way I do?
So let me play the devil's advocate.
Yes,
It's the law.
It's the
You
law.
get to choose, pick and choose which laws you enforce.
Police officers do that every day, believe that or not. And that's not a bad thing. I think everybody knows that. Has everybody in here been stopped for a B&T and been let go? Probably everybody in here. That's a prerogative of a police officer. Is it a violation of the law to speed? Yes. Our troopers and our deputies stop you. Sometimes they let you go. Most of the time I think they let you go. Is that violating the law? There's so many things that, you know, the police officer has discretion with. Sure, it is the law, but I feel that it violates our Second Amendment. I feel that it violates the safety and security of citizens that legally own guns. And I don't mean the ones that have guns illegal. Certainly that has nothing to do with me releasing names. But these are legally obtained and gun. And it's been that way forever. And now all of a sudden, people in Albany have a whim that, hey, everybody should know who owns weapons. I don't feel that.
Dave, we're just about a few minutes away from question and answer period. Are there some other things you'd like to impart before we bring Ray up and you both have an opportunity?
No, I could talk literally for hours. And again, I hope I have the opportunity. I have the whole law here, my presentation. Again, it's 3 hours. I've done it before. Yes.
Do you have a question?
Does someone have a question?
Ray, why don't you come on up and we'll roll right into the question and answer period.
And again, I apologize. I was going to go through this. I'm kind of glad it worked out this way because I would have never gotten through 100 of this law because there are so many different parts and so many very interesting parts. And there's good parts. Don't get me wrong. This is not a totally bad law. It was just done, I feel, improperly and too quick.
One of the good parts of the law, you know, is that the legislature figured out a way to get the information from us, HIPAA, all the sort of privacy stuff, get that information, scrub it, do whatever you had to do to it to release it to law enforcement. If you look at the shooter the other day, this guy in some other state shot some tires out, right? In some other state, in some domestic violence thing, he threatened somebody with a gun. Why doesn't that information travel? National Instant Background Check that the FBI runs for the nation, only half the states submit the information because the other states have laws preventing them from submitting the information. So why don't we figure out how to talk to each other? Because you got domestic violence, people that have been violent in the past. Who do you think is more likely to be violent in the future? Those characters. We don't know who they are. They go. We don't know. So
I think my opinion, I've said this for years, and it's just my opinion, but when this state closed Willard and Marcy and the rest of the mental health institutions, psychiatric institutions, for, I believe it was only for money, what else could it be for? That is the worst thing we could have ever done.
but I disagree.
And that's why we're in America. I think that totally is the worst thing we could have ever
Yes,
done.
Dave.
Yes.
I think this is the best argument against PowerPoint I've ever seen. You had to get your point, and you did. I got it vividly. My question is about the standard ground law in other states, and I know it's not New York State, but I don't really have a problem with pistol permits, having pistols. My problem is combining it with this very dangerous idea that you don't have to you don't have to back off. You got a gun, you're more likely to get into an event like Trayvon Martin case or anything else in other states. I wonder what your guys' position is on that.
I think it's bullshit that you can kill somebody illegally when you could have walked away. You know, like in that situation, right? I mean, there's times where you're going to be hurt, and there's times where you can walk away and tell people it's okay to shoot people, and they're likely to do it.
And I agree with 100% agree. I mean, there are states that, most of them are down south, as we know, Texas, Florida, that have very liberal gun laws, very liberal. A lot of our guns that we apprehend up here, people with those guns, come from those states. Because you can buy a gun in Texas without anything, as you know, as long as you got money. So those states do have liberal, very, very liberal gun laws. We don't. I just, again, I know I said this, we need reform. We absolutely need reform. But we need reform that doesn't violate our Second Amendment. We need reform that doesn't hurt honest people and honest people who follow our laws. We need reform where we can, you know, have sink teeth into the bad guys, not the good guys. That's my problem with this law. And again, not all of it. We're penalizing good people that follow our rules. And the bad guys are not being penalized at all because they don't care about 7 rounds. They don't care about a sawed-off shotgun. They don't care about a Uzi. They're going to have them because that's what they do. And if they know where to get pistols, they're going to burglarize our houses. I guarantee it. And not everyone, naturally, but they're going to pinpoint if they had a house to pick, and there's a gun here and they know it, and there's nothing there that they know about, they're going to go here.
We have another question, please.
So what is the solution then? If any laws that you pass, the bad guys aren't going to pay attention. They obviously aren't concerned with laws. So what is your top priority, or what do you think is the most important thing you could do to address these kinds of things?
Well, let me go quick. You look at the history go back 10 years. Most of our major gun incidents, including 2 days ago, is mental health, however you want it. Related. It really is. I mean, you go back to, remember in Texas where the woman drove her 4 kids into the water, killed them all? That's mental illness. So many of these have been, unless they're terrorists, they've all been mental illness except for maybe Fort Hood. Although that guy had to have a problem too, although he had a reason, he had a cause. But most of, I mean, all of them, 99% of them are mental illness. We've got to start with that. We've got to make New York Safe Act. 3/4 of this should be mental illness related. It really should be. That's the way I feel. We have to treat these people a lot more than walking into mental health. And again, not race fault. We need to, and Ray disagrees with me, but we need places like Willard and Marcy back where we can keep them and treat people rather than give them some pills, let them walk out the door because that's all we can do now. We need to keep them somewhere away from themselves so they don't hurt themselves and the public, and there's no way to do that now.
Thank you, Ray.
I think that the mass shootings that are done by people, when you look back and you take a look at, you know, like their pedigree, their birth voices and stuff like that, I'm not sure that's the vast majority of violence in America. I think there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of juvenile. You look at Syracuse, you see a lot of kids killing kids. I think that people who are ill can and do become violent, but I think there's a lot of other folks that do. The conversation that has to happen has to take a look at, first off, like this stuff, I think distracts us from talking about the stuff. Nobody knows what the stuff is. See, Dave is a smart guy, and I love him, and he has that opinion, and I got a different one. But where's the truth? Really? Where is the truth? Who are we looking at, and what should we be doing about them? And is it more about violence in our communities? Is it more about our culture? Because there's other countries that don't kill people. You know, why do we? I don't know. I mean, I'm not here with the answers. I got a lot of questions. So I think that we should figure out what the hell's going on, and then sort of look at it that way. Gun control, managing people who are ill and likely to harm people, these are all little levers to pull. There's a ton of other levers too. There's so many, gun control is meaningless in the country, is my opinion. So many guns out there. What are you gonna do? There's so many guns, there's so many assault rifles, there's so many shotguns, long guns, there's so much stuff out there. What are you gonna do? So
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree with Ray, that the street crimes are not 9% mental illness, they're 9% bad people. But these mass shootings are most of them, I believe, are mental illness related.
And I think the failure, really, of the mental health system, and those, like, you get folks in that situation that, aren't being, we have to figure out a way to grab those folks and, get them into treatment and manage their illnesses, and we don't do a really good job of that.
I think we need something federal. We have a federal gun law, but we need something where people can't go down to Texas and buy a gun and drive to New York and shoot somebody with it. We need federal laws constantly throughout the country. Every state has to have something federal. And one thing that you mentioned about what do we do about it, we need longer prison sentences for people that use weapons. We just truly do. Some of these people go in and are out a year and a half, 2 years. That's the only way. You got to hinder somebody from committing a crime. And people in there that don't have a mental illness to commit a crime, there's not much hindrance. We've got to make jail sentences mandatory longer, and we've got to stop plea bargaining for people that use a weapon. We just do. We have to make it mandatory. They have to know there's a recourse for their event. They have to know if they're going to use a weapon to break into a house invasion, rob somebody, kill somebody, they have to know that they're not going to be on the street for a long, long time, and they can't plea bargain this. That's all laws that we really need to do.
Sorry.
So, as a result of the 2 days ago at the ADR, there's a lot of talk about initial reports were mental illness and such. Sandy Hook was the safe as the direct result of Sandy Hook. Do you think that mental health will be back on the legislature's agenda, and will they put money into it?
No. They're closing. We have like the biggest psychiatric hospital system in the country. We have like, there's like, I think, again, 26 psych hospitals I'm pretty sure we have in New York State. California, five times the population has 5. So I'm not sure that, that works. But so they're closing some of these psych hospitals. First off, all of these psych hospital reductions, it's either an amendment or a law in New York State that says when you close hospitals, you reinvest the money in community services for folks with mental illness. Because if they're not at Willard or they're not at those joints, they're at my joint. So those resources were supposed to come to the communities to figure out ways to manage folks who have very serious chronic illnesses. The legislature suspended that rule, law, whatever it is, for the last several years. So the savings that they realized from hospital closings, reorganizations, are put somewhere else. They haven't resourced the system. They've stressed the system. Now they're closing more. Children's services at Hutchings are moving to Utica, so parents got to go to Utica now. That's if you can get a bed. Hutchings is going to have more adult beds. They had to work a deal with the union, right? So when they closed the hospitals, they promised everybody in the state that they would keep their jobs. So they're closing like 7, 8 hospitals, and they're realizing a savings of $26 million, which would buy 3 ACT teams in 4 big counties. I mean, and that money's not coming back to us. So they do have to take this seriously, but they're not. They got their other problems that they're sort of trying to sort out, diminishing resources, trying to sort of allocate everything like that. We haven't seen a dime. We've been bled.
It's another Albany mandate that's not permanent. We all know that. We're all business people. We know that Albany passes all these mandates and doesn't give the counties and municipalities any money at all to enforce them. It's been happening for years and years and years, and that's why the state is kind of even and the counties are hurting. Because we have to do what the state tells us to do, and we don't get money for it.
We have time for one last question. Eileen?
You said that to get a pistol permit, there's a mental health background check.
Yes,
Isn't someone's mental health medical history confidential?
now when it comes to pistol permits.
So if someone had sought treatment at Ray's Place or a private doctor, how would you know?
It all is in one place. It all goes to a place in Albany. DCJS is where we get it from.
But
It's-
do those
it's sealed.
doctors report everybody they treat?
Yes.
Oh,
It is sealed to everything except a pistol permit.
okay.
That's the only time we as police officers, we arrest somebody, we get a background check on them, we find out if they've got a criminal history, but we can't find out if they've got a mental history. We can with pistol permits, because that's mandated by law.
Isn't that just, that's for the involuntary placements though? So people who are in, it goes back to that national instant background check that Jeff runs. Those are, the information that you're getting on our folks who've been 2PC. You go to the hospital two ways, you're voluntary or you're an involuntary. Involuntary admissions is the information that these guys get. They don't get our records.
So if someone has voluntarily sought treatment, it doesn't show up in there?
It's not reportable to that particular registry, although now with the SAFE Act, you know, the standard for voluntary admission is sort of imminent risk to health or others. That information now is available to DCJS.
Well, it's you. Okay, so you started this whole thing. I think we can have a question, Meg.
I guess what my problem is the Navy Yard, Fort Hood, I mean, they raise these issues and then they push it towards mental health. But wouldn't it be accurate to say that if you looked at data in this county over the last 30 years, the gun violence that happens, is it mental health related or is it far more domestic violence, crime, suicide, accidental shootings, misfires?
You're absolutely right. When I talk about the mental health, it's mostly the major shootings. I'm not talking about domestic violence. I'm not talking about somebody robbing somebody and shooting them, home invasion. Those are not mental health people. Those are bad people. I'm talking about the major incidences. And
Right.
if you go back, you'll find out, and I thought 2 days ago, this guy's got a mental health
I
problem.
read that this morning.
And then they say on the news, they just didn't connect the dots. Well, very true. The dots have not been connected in most of these major incidences. They just haven't. And most of them have history of mental illness. And again, I'm just talking about mass shootings.
Right.
You're absolutely right. The normal, I don't want to say run of the mill, but the normal crimes in our counties are committed by people that do not have a mental illness, that are bad people that have possessions of weapons and want to hurt someone or want to steal
And
something.
that's what we need to do something about.
They're just talking about all of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Obviously, we can have a much longer conversation, and
I'd
perhaps
love
some
to
of
be
you.
invited back. I think
I
it's-
have registered that. That landed. Well, we are committed to getting you out on time, so we have about 1 minute left. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming. These two men, but I believe that if you want to have a further conversation with them, they would probably be willing to do that. And I noticed, I think Ray put these on the table, these are a contact hotline, and they say a safe place to talk it out. And I think we can all agree that mental illness is not something that's always easy to spot. And everybody struggles from time to time, so I encourage you to take these, put them in your homes, put them in your offices, and help people find the help that they need, so.
Can I just pose you one comment? People, years ago, and I mean a lot of years ago, when I first became a police officer, I thought when they said mental illness, I thought people, that's just a name for somebody that wants attention that doesn't really need it. That is absolutely, my thoughts were so wrong. Mental illness exists and exists in a lot more people than we realize, and we've got to recognize that as a community and as business leaders, and we really need to help these people. Somehow we need to change where we can help more people with mental illness, because it's a very serious thing, and it is real. It's truly real.
Yeah, thank you. Leave your name tags. There are evaluations on the table, and believe me, we take them seriously, and a lot of the topics that surface come from those, so please fill them out. Did you have something you wanted to say?
No.
Okay.